There's conversations about personal responsibility and accountability, but like the conversation as to why people are trapping, why people are using drugs has more to do with the structural inequities of how people are not part of the economic system that is currently available for people. And no one's talking about those pathways. Everyone's just saying the things you're doing to survive, what you do well in, are wrong. But you're not giving people anything else. And part of the reason why they're there is because you didn't give them anything in the first place. So it's just really stupid.
You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
I'm Zachary Siegel, and you're listening to Narcotica. This episode is long overdue. We're very happy to welcome to the show Kassandra Frederique, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance. Kassandra, we know you're super busy, so thank you very much for stepping away from all the important work you're doing and coming on our show to talk some nerdy drug policy with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, this is a big one. We landed Kassandra. Also on the pod today, we have Narcotica co-hosts Troy Farah and Chris Moraff. What's up, guys?
Hello.
What's up, Zach?
Oh, just living, I guess, in my girlfriend's closet. It's where I quarantine. So just to dive right into it, we've got a lot of ground to cover. So the Drug Policy Alliance is coming off some pretty big policy victories. New York just legalized cannabis, and New Jersey was sort of legalized right before that. And it sounds like New Mexico is in line to be next. So there's lots of action. And, there seems to be some actually important criminal justice components also happening in these laws, which we'll definitely get to. But first, for some of our listeners, Kassandra, what's DPA's role in this big wave of change sweeping the nation? From Oregon decriminalizing all drugs to, all these states legalizing cannabis. DPA is there pushing and organizing and doing its thing, right?
Yeah, I would say that we've been pretty busy over the last couple of years. DPA has really been focusing on working with folks on the ground and just articulating and putting into motion structures for these pretty big wins in Oregon, RC4. There are two organizations, Drug Policy Alliance, which is our C3, and our sister organization, Drug Policy Action, which is our C4. Our C4, Drug Policy Action, led the ballot initiative process in Oregon, working with folks on the ground. And our Drug Policy Alliance organization has been doing work in states like New Mexico and New York and New Jersey for a while, and really building the movement and infrastructure to get really big wins. And so I would say that we're a little busy. We tend to be in the middle of the action. It's super exciting, super exhausting, but also super rewarding when we win.
So there's all these new legal cannabis laws. I think that, if I remember correctly, between 2014 and 2020, there were 11 states that legalized cannabis. And in the last 7 months, it's been a bunch of states, I think 6 or 7. But let's talk about some of these laws. How do they deal with repairing the atrocious history of racist policing and drug enforcement, especially in New York, which is home to the brutal Rockefeller drug laws and all that?
I think one of the biggest advances in marijuana reform policy in the last couple of years has been it being unapologetically criminal justice reform. I think one of the staples of DPA has been our commitment to do multiple parts of drug policy reform work. So, we've been a part of marijuana reform work. We've done criminal justice work around sentencing and disparities. We do work around harm reduction. And I think there was an explicit decision to make our marijuana reform work explicitly criminal justice focused and anchored. And what you see in the bills in New York and New Mexico is like a very clear instrument to remove criminal penalties, but also remove the criminalizing factors that happen in other parts of the system. So really focusing on, in New York especially, like removing all the other ways that marijuana is used to destabilize people. So whether it's child welfare or housing or unemployment or parole or probation, recognizing that, you know, this is much more than the plant. And I think that's what you're seeing and what we're pushing is like, listen, like your opinion of drugs and whether people should use it or not, I don't care, right? Like, I think people should be able to use drugs if they want to. What I really care about is how you use drugs to destabilize people. And so any policy we put forward is not just about accessing the drug, it's about removing the way that the state uses that drug to mess people up. I don't give a fuck if you use drugs or not. Like, what I give a fuck about is like how the state tries to fuck people over. And like, it's, you know, and I think oftentimes people, what's been interesting about this movement is like, there had to be a merging of like the marijuana reform folk and the criminal justice folks. And I think that, you know, that was full of stretching on both parts. And I think what you see in New York is the melding of those two people with the very clear anchoring that this is not just about access to the plant, that this is about access to freedom and liberation. And you will not get one without the other because we won't allow it to go forward.
Let's talk about some of the like dichotomies and across the spectrum of these types of laws. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's one thing to legalize weed. It's another thing to include reparations for people that have been harmed in the past, or to make it something that's not tested for probationers, or, you know, something you won't get kicked off a methadone clinic for doing. What are the different extremes of this? And is every state kind of handle this differently?
Yeah, I think different states didn't handle those things, right? And I think people had to come back and try to fix it. I think about places like Washington State, you know, they were one of the earlier ones. You know, a report just came out a few weeks ago that showed that, you know, they legalized cannabis and drug testing for pregnant people skyrocketed, right? And when you're having drug testing for pregnant people, you know, people are getting their kids taken away. The state isn't engaging folks. And of course, the racial disparities were clear. It was like Black pregnant people were having the state interfere with their lives because they tested positive for cannabis, right? And it's just like, the thing for us is like, we're very clear that this thing is whack-a-mole. And we're just like, I would rather us not play with that. Like, why can't we get as much as possible in the beginning? And I think what you're seeing is folks moving into that place, right? Like, oh, we have to do it at the same time. And we have to increase our ask. So it would be irresponsible. It would be racist. It would be delusional if our cannabis asks from 2012 were the same asks we had in 2021, because we've learned so much. And so I think that what you see in New York is different than what you saw 10 years ago. But if what happened 10 years ago didn't happen, New York wouldn't be possible. So I think the standard just changes as we keep going on and on.
I think so. So I sort of had a point or kind of a follow-up to what you were just saying, Kassandra, about how like the kind of push to change these laws 10 years ago, you know, obviously things have changed and evolved, and the politics today are super different from back then. And you were talking about kind of marrying the marijuana cannabis legalization movement with criminal justice reform. And I think for listeners who might not know, you know, the full background of you and DPA, but you came on board to lead DPA, like, I think in March 2020, right? And then, you know, just 2 months later, it was like George Floyd was killed by police, and that sparked like the biggest protest movement seen in my lifetime, maybe our history. Like, can you sort of talk about when you came into this position? Like, A, how did it feel to watch what was going on in the world? And then B, like, how did that maybe change your approach or agenda at DPA?
Yeah, so thanks for this question. I mean, I think one of the things that's important is I was announced in March as the next person, but I didn't take the role until September. And part of it is when George Floyd happened, I think it was an awakening moment for a lot of people. It wasn't for me. I think for me, my awakening moment happened like 8-10 years ago with Ramarley Graham in New York, in the Bronx, where this young man was killed in the bathroom in front of his grandma and his little brother. And that was at the time where I was probably a policy coordinator or an associate. I was in an entry-level position in DPA's New York office. And I remember going to the protest in the Bronx, and I remember being really upset because a lot of the civil rights folks weren't marching with us. And part of the reason they weren't marching with us is because the original reporting on the issue was that Ramarley was in a hand-to-hand, right, with cannabis. And, you know, as the details came out years later, you know, that is a disputed point, but that is how I came to it. And we were just really getting into our work around marijuana arrest and stop and frisk and policing. And I remember being worried about making the connection. And part of it was because I still hadn't worked through my biases around drugs, right? So I felt super protective of the family and feeling like, man, like, I don't want to like use this person's death as a tool to push my advocacy work, right? Like, I don't want to exploit the family. And they were rightfully very upset about the drug connection because it was being used as a way to justify law enforcement killing their son. And I had really complicated feelings because I don't think I fully, like, I understood that law enforcement was using it as justification, but I was I was super impressionable about how the family was reacting negatively to that association and the stigma. Remember, like, cannabis was still is still highly stigmatized now, but it was way more stigmatized, 10 years ago. And I remember being the person that had to make the choice about whether we were going to connect it or not. And I said no. And I said, I don't want us to talk about the way that the cops killed this guy and how they're using marijuana, because the family doesn't really want that. And I want to respect the family's wishes, but I also was kind of like, it was weird. It was hard. It was like, there was a lot there. I was infuriated that the civil rights community was hesitant in the beginning to embrace this family and uplift the work because of the drugs. And then I think a few weeks later, Trayvon Martin was killed. And, cannabis came up again. And I think it was at that moment where I was like, if it was weird, because it was like, and this is really arrogant. But it felt like if I would have said something, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Like, if we had made the point that, cannabis and policing and racism are being used to smear this person and give them the justification to kill this young man, if we were louder, if we were bigger, if we protested, like, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And, that's not realistic. But I felt a deep level of guilt because it felt like it happened again. And I think with George Floyd, it was not an awakening. It was a reinforcing. And I think what was powerful about the moment was that I was finally in a position of power organizationally to make sure that DPA was the loudest it could be about that connection. So it is 10 years of like being one of the most junior people on staff and not necessarily having the power, the decision-making to make DPA's posture aggressive and assertive and unapologetic about it. And then being in this role where I'm literally now the ED and I get to direct how this large organization is going to engage with us. And I feel like you see that in the way that we've moved, which is like, no, this is about policing drugs and racism. This is bullshit. Fentanyl didn't kill George Floyd. You're needed and you're lying. This is the same lawyer that did this with Philando Castillo. The drug war is what killed Breonna Taylor. The drug war is what killed Carlos Lopez. The drug war is what killed Daniel Prude. And like just naming it every single time, like, no, this is what it is. And we're actively going to work to dismantle it. And so I think that is kind of the difference. But I feel like for me, it was the pain of watching the cycle continue was what I felt. And I think even more upset was recognizing that Breonna Taylor had been killed the month before, and we still didn't know. I didn't know about it. It was like through George Floyd did we learn about Breonna Taylor, and just recognizing the particular way that police kill Black women, trans and cis, on the drug war, and how people don't talk about that as well. And so I think that's what the summer represented, which is like, we're going to do this differently.
Damn. Yeah, that's powerful shit.
Yeah, I don't think enough of the connection has been made between the extent to which the drug war has fueled mass incarceration, down to just people getting engaged in economic crimes earlier, which lead to an increased risk of arrest after the age of 18. Yep. Even for something that's not drug related. So it sort of creates the environment for a life of criminality to continue after that. And I think that is a really important point to make, that we can't just look at the numbers of people in jail for drugs, because a lot of the people that are in jail for things other than drugs probably got their start on the street trapping. I mean, an important distinction to point out, I think.
Yeah, and I think people miss the fact that, like, we say like a lot of the reasons why people use drugs are the same reason why people sell drugs. And I feel like you've seen historically groups that do drug policy reform have struggled and stumbled in making the analysis around people selling drugs, right? And so I think about oftentimes when people can say that this person was selling drugs, that justifies why the state can kill them, right? So with Ramarley, it was like, oh, he was doing a hand-to-hand. Or Eric Garner, oh, he was selling untaxed cigarettes. Like these are all things where it's like, well, why were they doing that in the first place? What is the economic and structural violence that created these conditions? And how is that also part of the drug war, right? Like these are rational choices that people are making. Yeah, it's violent. It's violent. Like prohibition is violent as fuck, right? And like, let's actually deal with the root of that, which is prohibition, and like have the conversation as to how it's setting these structural factors that people are engaging with. And I think so often, like, people are so amped to blame the individual that they don't want to ask the question about how we set that person up. And, there's conversations about personal responsibility and accountability, but like the conversation as to why people are trapping, why people are using drugs has more to do with the structural inequities of how people are not part of the economic system that is currently available for people. And no one's talking about those pathways. Everyone's just saying the things you're doing to survive, what you do well in, are wrong. But you're not giving people anything else. And part of the reason why they're there is because you didn't give them anything in the first place. So it's just really stupid.
Yeah. In 2019, DPA put out a really interesting report called Rethinking the Drug Dealer. And like drug dealer is in scare quotes. Like, is like under your leadership or, having the organization move on these issues in a different direction, like is that kind of report kind of like a sign of that? I haven't seen much of anyone try to even like not apologize for drug dealing, but to like contextualize the economic circumstances that lead to drug dealing and how that is a critical aspect of the drug policy reform. But like you're saying, like not a lot of organizations are trying to do this kind of analysis.
I think the thing that I'm interested in is DPA doing the hard work, because now there's a problem when the state starts using your language. When like the president of the United States is using your language, when police officers are using your talking points, when people are like, oh yeah, well, we agree with that, but we just don't like this particular thing. It means that we need to ask for more. So I find like we can't end drug prohibition and we can't end the drug war without figuring out how we navigate people who sell drugs. And talking about people who sell drugs, people that are part of manufacturing and trafficking, all these things are a part of the drug war and we can't ignore them, right? Like we can't end the drug war for people who use drugs and not deal with everybody else. And I think we're going to have to fumble through. I don't think we're going to get it always. I don't think we're always going to get it right. But I think we need to start having that conversation. And inherent in that conversation is really navigating the issue of violence. And those are things that, I'm not saying DPA next year is going to have a policy agenda, but what I am saying is that in the next couple of years, DPA is going to be having those conversations with people and partners and figuring out what's the way forward.
So the question I have, kind of a follow-up to that, do these cannabis laws do enough? Do they go far enough in terms of drug equity? I remember being told that Illinois has one of the most progressive cannabis laws in the country, unlike, say, Colorado and Washington State, which seem to just legalize weed without thinking very deeply about how to repair the harms of the drug war. Illinois baked in a bunch of these provisions in their law that would seem to go much further. But it appears that the rollout in Illinois has actually been pretty abysmal. I'm drawing some of this from a Marijuana Business Daily article from last July that titled, Illinois Social Equity Program Flawed, Advocates Say, but it's best in cannabis industry so far. It quotes Akel Parnell, a Chicago-based attorney and board member of Chicago Normal, who said, because of the limitations of how we are able to structure the program, we can't be 100% certain that the social equity program will bring the racial diversity that we want. But Parnell also noted, criticisms aside, it's hard to come up with a better approach. So thinking about some of the more recent laws that have been passed, like such as New York, maybe New Mexico soon, do any of these laws really get it? And what would you like to see more of, maybe less of?
One, I think that I find that the standard that we're trying to navigate for cannabis is super important. And I also remind people that we are regulating under a system of capitalism. And it's really hard to create equity in a structure that's inequitable, right? And so people are doing the best that they can. Of course, New York and New Mexico is probably going to go further than Illinois because we paid attention to the things that didn't work for them. I think our bills are only going to be as good as they are implemented. And so I think on paper, they're strong. And I think implementation is going to be key. And I think that that's in general what everything is, right? But cannabis legalization and the industry is not going to solve racism. And I think the problem or the challenge is that when we started doing this work around cannabis and around, legalization, it was, people promised that. And that was always wrong. Like, it's going to lessen these things, but it's not going to eliminate them because this inherently has to be an issue of changing the way that we deal with public safety. And that's why folks in cannabis need to be a part of broader criminal justice movements around policing, around economic justice, because those things aren't just going to magically appear in cannabis policy. They're not just going to magically work for us because we're still operating in those larger structures.
Right.
I think the thing that I would say about cannabis that I'm actually really interested in is what are different regulatory models than what we have now. Like before everyone was like, well, regulate it like alcohol. It is known that alcohol is not a racially diverse industry, but that's what we modeled our regulation on. And so I think that the thing for our movement is like, what are different regulation models that are not based on inequitable systems? And that's what I'm actually most interested in as cannabis continues to be regulated, but also as we have the broader conversation around the regulation of all drugs.
Yeah, in a recent press release, I think it was exactly about how at least DPA doesn't in its legalization efforts want to replicate the alcohol industry and big tobacco. And that's really where like a lot of the debate seems to be shifting now, where people used to be debating, oh, should this be legalized? And now the debate is exactly where you just brought it to, which is how should we do it? How should these markets be created? And so in terms of like tobacco and alcohol as kind of learning lessons of what not to do, which is like, I mean, tobacco still, like, even after the big lawsuits and all the billions of dollars in advertising, like the people who still smoke cigarettes, at least a significant number of the ones still buying it, it's low income people, poor people, and minorities, racial minorities. That's still the biggest kind of buyer of cigarettes. So like, I know cigarettes are not uh, weed, like cannabis is just like a different thing. But yeah, what kind of models and kind of regulatory structures for these markets are you imagining that would kind of dispense with the kind of nasty side of the alcohol and tobacco industry?
I think one of the things that's super important for this is, part of the reason why we came out with the statement around tobacco and alcohol was just because it was just so ridiculous, right? It was like, you have benefited so much from prohibition. You've done nothing to talk about how prohibition is not healthy and how it's a bad policy. Like alcohol, big alcohol especially, it's like, you guys literally did this. Like, this doesn't work, and you have no problem keeping prohibition in place for other people, knowing that research and data shows how dangerous alcohol actually is, right? And like how much support we actually need. Like, you don't die from a heroin withdrawal. You can die from an unsupervised alcohol withdrawal. Like, this is like a real conversation about prohibition, and like, y'all just let prohibition of other drugs go for so long because it helped your bottom line. So one, that was just like, oh, you can't be quiet. Oh, you can't start talking now, like talking about we need to end prohibition. Like, y'all have been chilling while people have been killed, while people have died, while all these public health issues, like y'all have just been on the sidelines watching this. So that was one reason. But the other thing is the thing that DPA navigates is that we're an organization that believes in autonomy. We're an organization that believes in ending criminalization, but we're also an organization that believes in public health. And those companies or those industries, while they believe in autonomy, their commitments to public safety and their commitments to public health are questionable, if non-existent. They are stakeholders in the work, but they are not our allies in the work. And I think that making that distinction is important because we do want to care about issues around public health. And so that those are the conversations around advertising. Those are the conversations about testing and research. And I think as we have those conversations and how we build the markets, I think we're also like, profit can't be the thing that drives the way we move through regulation. I mean, not the way that alcohol and tobacco do it, because the people that use drugs, we want them to be at the center, and we want their wellness to be at the center. And a profit-driven system, one under capitalism, has put them in really dangerous positions now because of the ways that we enforce those policies. And so if we're going by the same structures and strategies by those companies, we're going to be in a similar situation. Regulation is supposed to give us more choices, not less.
Kassandra, I'd really like to know your thoughts on drug war reparations. There's this push in Congress to study reparations for slavery, which I support personally. But there's also talk of reparations for people who have been targeted by the drug war. And why not? If your life was destroyed by a seemingly arbitrary law, these plants or these chemicals are illegal, while these are totally fine, why shouldn't you be getting a monthly check for the time and wealth that was stolen from you?
There's no question, I believe in drug war reparations. And I think reparations are more than a check, right? They're the acknowledgement of what happened. There is the atonement for what happened, so like a truth process. There can be compensation, whether it's monetarily or different forms of compensation. But then there's also the commitment that it won't happen again. So, oftentimes the things that I'm interested in is as we talk about, folks talk about marijuana legalization reparations. And I'm like, cool, yes. And how do we make sure that they don't just shift it to something else? And so I think the conversation about reparations in general is huge, and one that we all need to be focusing on. It's something that I focus on in my work. And that, DPA is having conversations with, our movement partners like Movement for Black Lives and People's Laws Project and other Black-led organizations that are figuring out like, what does reparations for the drug war look like? And I think what's exciting is that this can serve as a platform for us to have reparations for other issues, because the thing about the drug war, it was intentional. And there are other policy choices that were intentional that are outside of the drug war that also deserve reparations. And I think it's crucial for us to not just be like, yeah, we should get reparations, but us actually to build the campaigns that do that. And I think you see parts of that in the New York bill, which is like, cool, like 40% of that money that comes, the tax revenues is going back to the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the drug war. Like, it doesn't go back to the state. You have to give it back to the communities.
That leads into kind of like a conspiracy theory that I have. So many of these states that are legalizing cannabis are expunging records. They're throwing out any trace of criminal activity for using cannabis. It pretty much only applies to, quote, nonviolent offenders, whatever that means. But something I've encountered lately is that by expunging records, ostensibly a good thing, right? Like, the government is making it harder for citizens to hold them accountable for the harms they've inflicted in the name of the drug war. To give an example, in March, Washington State Supreme Court struck down their drug possession law. They said being arrested for having drugs on you was unconstitutional, and they were immediately sued by a group of defense attorneys in King and Snohomish counties to recover penalties paid in simple drug possession cases, according to mynorthwest.com. So I guess my question is, does expunging drug records, again, something I think is a good thing, make it harder for people to hold the government accountable for the trauma and suffering they've been inflicted via the drug war? Is it good enough to say, well, you're no longer a felon for possessing an ounce of plant material, good luck?
Yeah, absolutely not. That is coming from a scarcity mindset. Someone shouldn't have to carry the burden of criminalization to get repaid for the harm. I think we need to give people the opportunity to be full citizens in our lives, and we just have to figure out how to do both. I don't think we have to pick one or the other, and I don't think we have to sequence one over the other. This is a really long fight, and it just means that our movement needs to think through how we do both at the same time, because people shouldn't have to wait to get their lives back together in order to get reparations. Like, I wouldn't want to still be enslaved in order to get reparations. Like, we can figure it out. And I think we just, as the conversations continue, that's what we'll do.
I wanted to turn the topic to the fight for supervised injection in Philadelphia, which I think came closer than anywhere else to becoming a reality. As everyone here knows, the Third Circuit shot down the lower court's ruling that supervised injection would not violate the Controlled Substances Act. But the context in which that fight happened, there were many like sort of side arguments, and one of them was this idea that that this was a white problem, and people only started paying attention to it when it was a white problem. And I think that the racial politics that got infused into this fight for a public health measure was not entirely authentic and genuine. But besides that, I would say, what do you think the prospects are now under a Biden administration? Biden is certainly an improvement to what we had before, but he is definitely an 80s style drug warrior. And I think we might be remiss in not focusing on that, just because we're happy that a Democrat's in the White House.
Listen, I feel like everyone at DPA has been waiting all their life to push Joe Biden to change what he has done. So, I think folks are like excited about the different direction the administration is in, but no one has forgotten who got us here. And so I think there is a lot of work to be done. I mean, I think the Biden-Harris administration just came out and put their statement and said the words harm reduction, and everyone's super excited. Like they finally got it. And I'm like, yeah, no, like, okay, Matt, like that's the bare minimum, my guy. Like we are losing so many people right now, more than we've ever had. And we're not going to just fix this with the things that we've already told you for the last 20 years that we need. Like we have to move the goalposts. And that includes, safer consumption spaces, but it also includes safe supply. Like we're in 2021, 80,000 people are dying. Like we are in, like, it can't get more code red than where we are. And so I think that the fight for safer consumption spaces needs to be expanded, needs to be more assertive about, like, we have the moral high ground. I think that the dynamic you talked about in Philadelphia is a real one. And I think there's truth to it. And I also think that part of it is I'm trying to be careful here, because it's very real that the rhetoric around overdose was influenced by the perception of who was being affected. But I think part of it is that people were lied to, like people don't realize that overdose is skyrocketing among Black and Latino people, and that in some cases it's leveling off among white people. People are missing the fact that this has always been a racialized issue, and even in the way that the response is. And I would say that some of the people, especially in Philadelphia, right, there are some of the people in Philadelphia that are using the racial politics to be disruptive and to be destabilizing. It is also a critique of our organizing, right? Like, how are we going into communities of color and dismantling the miseducation, right? It's not, even though folks know that the drug war is racist, you're not telling communities of color anything they don't know. We haven't always put into tangible concepts, it's racist and it's not good for you, right? Like, it's not like these policies are racist in nature, or they're classist in nature. Like, I think a lot of times people just feel like communities of color are supposed to follow something just because something happens to be racist. And we're way more multidimensional. We deserve way more analysis. We deserve way more investment in public education, and not after we've decided to do something, but in the beginning. And that's not a critique to Philadelphia. That's a critique to our harm reduction and drug policy movement in general. That I think oftentimes, and you saw this with marijuana, where folks were like, we want to legalize marijuana because, first it was like, we want to legalize marijuana because it's a plant and we have rights. Then people started realizing that racial justice was an effective tool to, like, get elected officials. So then we promised, like, racial justice utopia. And then everybody was surprised when it didn't work out. And it's like the conversation around racial justice, it's not a strategy. It has to be an ethos. And I think people see through that. And because they see through that, it makes it difficult to do the multiracial organizing that we need to do to save our communities.
Thank you so much for that very well-reasoned and thoughtful response. It was really great. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like also I'm seeing this with the major opioid litigation happening, when you see like the families who lost loved ones to Oxycontin, let's say, like the list of people who probably were harmed by pharma, it's a very white looking crowd of moms, of families, of people trying to kind of jump into the billions at stake in this litigation, right?
It's so interesting. We're having this fight in New York right now because it's as it's as if people believe that there are no Black families or Latinx families or Indigenous or Asian families that have lost their loved ones to overdose.
Or to pharma and healthcare malfeasance.
Yeah, like it's like as if we weren't targeted by pharma, as if we weren't barred from pharma, as if we didn't have access to it. In the beginnings of the overdose crisis, and we were talking about this, and people were like, oh, white people are dying. First of all, there's more white people in this country, one, so raw numbers is always going to be more. But two, it's like folks were like, oh, well, Black people can't get access to pharma because, they're drug seeking, so nobody wants to give them drugs. And that racism was a protective factor. Like, that's what people were saying 5 years ago.
That stuff drives me nuts, by the way. Oh my God.
Like Black
that to someone who has sickle cell. Racism's not helping them.
Mostly Black people. Like Black people, just like
it's not.
It is ridiculous the way that the conversation around opioid settlements, as well as who are the face of those conversations. And it's not that white families shouldn't be leading that conversation. It's that families in general should be leading it. So the vanguard of that push needs to be way more diverse. But it also shows you the hierarchy of who is listened to.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Right? It's like the thing that Chris just brought up about how it's a white issue is like, if the majority of the people that were dying of overdose were Black, were Latinx, would state attorney generals across this country sue the companies? Did attorney generals sue any of the banks for redlining? Did they do state attorney generals sue law enforcement for all the Black people they're killing? It is what is their recognition of pain, and when does that pain register for there to be state action? And that is what serves as the destabilizing force in places like Philadelphia.
Damn, yeah. No, that's the connection right there. Yeah. So we maybe winding down a bit and getting the conversation to you, Kassandra. Like, let's talk a little bit more about you so our listeners can like know who you are more. Like, I first learned some of your background when Northwestern journalism professor Stephen Thrasher invited you and me into his journalism class, and I think that was like back in October, and we were, I heard you talking about your background as in social work, and if I recall, you mentioned how like you didn't initially intend to specialize in treating addiction or focusing on drug issues or drug policy. Can you talk a little bit about the impetus behind your professional move into this world out of the kind of clinical world?
When it's so interesting because I always feel bad talking about this because it is really such an honor and a privilege to do this kind of work. And I wasn't intentional about being in this space. I have always been an organizer, community gatherer. I think anyone you talk to, me growing up in New York City, if you talk to someone that went to school with me, like I organized the teacher's baby shower and bridal shower and school dances and student body president and community trips to Dorney Park. Like I've always been a community gatherer. In high school, student body president, in choir, all these different things. College, part of the social justice space, the Black women's spaces, all that stuff. And was in the labor school, so did believe in like collective building and social change. Social work was unintentional as well. I was graduating in 2008. Had no idea what I wanted to do. Someone told me to go to grad school. I didn't want to take another test. The social work school didn't have a GRE. So I went there. And
GRE is terrible, by the way. You made the right move.
I'm in social work school, and I did take a class on the intersection between criminal justice and social work. And I was like, oh, yeah, I want to be in justice. Like, I knew I wanted to be in some sort of justice world. If you look at an essay I did for a scholarship, I never even imagined doing policy work. I don't even think I had the concept that it was the kind of work that I could do. I don't know if it's that I didn't think I was smart enough or anything like that, but I had no concept of it. Like, if you look at an essay, what I wanted to do was organize events for nonprofits, because I knew I could organize events, but the concept of organizing people was not yet there for me. Like, it hadn't materialized in my mind when I was like 17, 18 years old. Even though I had been organizing people my whole life, but just through the concept of events. And in social work school, you get an internship. I didn't pick DPA. I picked somewhere else. There was drama between the school and the place of my internship. And so the school was like, she's not going there. And they asked me if I wanted to do an internship with an anti-racism organization that did trainings, or if I wanted to go to the place that just did Rockefeller drug law reforms. In my lifetime, I've been a part of so many DEI efforts. And I was like, I'm really done watching white people realize that they're white. So I just want more for myself. I picked DPA and had no idea. I didn't realize that DPA was on like I knew they did the Rockefeller drug law reforms, but I wasn't quite clear that they were against the drug war, So much so I thought I was gonna work at ONDCP after my internship, because I thought, oh yeah, they're gonna love my experience, like in my first week. And then I was here at DPA, and what was great about it was it gave a lot of analysis for the things I saw and experienced in New York. Like, I was like, oh, wow, this is incredible. Like, so many lights went off, like lights for things in my family, lights for things for friends, lights for things like in the neighborhood, like in college. I remember my freshman year, I had two friends from high school that died of overdose. And I remember being called on campus in college and being like, this person passed away. They were together and it was a drug overdose. And I remember being on campus and I didn't even really understand what that meant. I was just like, oh, wow, that's sad. Like, what do you mean? So they're like dead? And everyone was like, yeah. And I was like, wow, that fucking sucks. And like going, being at DPA, and in 2011, us passing Good Samaritan laws and like recognizing, like, if there was a Good Samaritan law, could that have helped, these two high school classmates, right? Or, yeah, I mean, I think for me it was, I'm super privileged and honored to be leading an organization because I'm literally the product of political and public education around drugs through DPA. Like, I know as much as I do because DPA exists and took the time to develop me as an advocate. And it's not that I learned everything from DPA, it's just that DPA provided the connective tissue of the things that I already knew as a Black woman growing up in New York.
Yeah. I'm really grateful that organizations like DPA exist because they have educated me on a lot of stuff as well. I think this is a good place to wrap up. We want to respect your time and everything. Is there anything else that you want people to know about? Anything that DPA is working on that might be coming out soon, or anything you want people to know, where people can find you on social media, all that kind of stuff?
I'm still kind of getting nervous about the fact of more people following me because I'm just like, I like to be free on my social media. But you can find me at Kassandra_Fred on Twitter. What I would say is we cannot do this alone. I think the thing I want drug policy reformers to know and to understand is that our work is not in a vacuum. We may have a lane and a niche, but it's so interconnected with so many other things. And I think that drug policy has been able to kind of walk the line because so many people like us, right? So you have people from all sides of the aisle who are invested in this issue for many different reasons. Like we're one of the few issues that cut across political lines. I think that's incredibly important. But I think if we are going to end the drug war, that we have to firmly be on the side of justice, and that DPA is not going to, under me at least, we're not going to push for drug policy at the expense of justice. That it will be justice wholesale.
Yeah.
And that we will be providing a platform for other movements to push. We won't be cutting other people down and saying only for drugs. That is not our work. Our work is because the people who use drugs, they're impacted by multiple issues. They're not just impacted by drugs. They're impacted by housing, unemployment, policing. And so therefore our work has to be generative enough that if we end prohibition, that the other things that impact these people are also aided by the work that we do. Because one of the things I've said to harm reductionists is, if we give someone naloxone and reverse their overdose, and they get up and they get to walk, and then they walk down the block and then get killed by a police officer, we have not saved their life, we have delayed their death. And I want to be in the business of saving lives wholesale. And so that means that we have to give people naloxone and we have to deal with all the other things that kill people.
Yeah, safe supply. I'm so in favor of that.
Yeah, and also just that, while we're talking, like the Derek Chauvin trial, like, is happening, and it's such a clinic in how the kind of collective notions of drug use, especially by Black men, are interpreted in a courtroom, by a jury, by all of us watching, that it is so cross-cutting, that drugs are, in all of our lives, whether we're using them or not.
The thing that I said when people talk to me about Breonna Taylor and with George Floyd, I say the same thing. If Breonna was a drug dealer, if George Floyd was injecting on the street, neither one of them should be dead.
Mm-hmm.
People who use drugs, people who sell drugs should not be executed by the law.
Right.
That is the principle that I'm fighting for, right? Like, just because you use drugs, just because you are involved in sales, you should not be executed by the state with impunity. It's not okay. One of the guiding statements that I think about quite often is, one of my pinned tweets by Dorsey Nunn, the founder of All of Us or None in California, who's formerly incarcerated. And he says, my son may not get Skittles and a drink. He may get a beer and a blunt, and I still expect him to make it home safe. Like that is the guiding star. That is the guiding star. That the state doesn't have a right to kill you, period, regardless if you're involved in drugs or not.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Kassandra. I really appreciate the work you do and the work the DPA does. We're so happy to promote it, and hope we can have you on again sometime.
I'd love to. Thanks so much for the work that y'all are doing.
Yeah, no, this is great. Definitely excited to learn more about you and your story and hear about kind of, where DPA is at under your leadership and where it's going. And there's already been so much accomplished just in the last 6 months, while you've been heading it. It's quite remarkable, quite impressive. I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks for listening to Narcotica, an independent production production by Troy Farah, Christopher Moraff, and Zachary Siegel. I'm your co-producer, Aaron Ferguson. If you like the show, you can support us by joining our Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Narcotica. You can get some merch and more perks that are coming soon. A little goes a long way, so thanks for helping us out. We're ad-free and want to keep it that way. If Patreon isn't for you, that's fine. You can help us out by spreading the word. Tell all your friends about the podcast, advocating for social justice and abolishing the drug war. Rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music is by Glass Boy, and Jenny Shea is the voice of Narcotica. Additional music is by myself, Aaron Ferguson. I'm a drug-using producer who goes by the alias Nomad1 on SoundCloud. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. That's everything. Have a good weekend.